Frank Baker. You haven't lived in Vancouver if you haven't run into him sometime. He was Vancouver's most flamboyant restaurant owner. And if you don't believe that, all you have to do is ask him. He's always putting on a show.
If you came to Vancouver from Regina or Winnipeg or Saskatoon or Edmonton or Calgary, you had to go to the attic. It was impossible to come to Vancouver and not go to the attic.
I can certainly recall a restaurant over in West Vancouver. It was always crowded and very, very successful.
And in those days, we could not expand the business fast enough. Well, if that's the case, if people want to come and come and come again, then you can't help but make money.
He was a great collector of Tiffany glass lamps, and I've forgotten how many he had in the thing. Must have been a couple hundred, unbelievable. He was collecting them everywhere.
And there's no question about the fact that Frank being there and being someone who was going to blow his trumpet during the course of that evening, that was a great thing about certainly about that particular restaurant.
One of the first things when I went into it, when he opened it, here it was. Here's a clock with all fives. And he also had a watch with all fives on it. Every time is 5 o'clock.
That I used to tell the Colonel, I said, Colonel, if you had my recipe for chicken, you'd be a general. And now that he's gone, I'm trying to carry on his tradition with a little goatee, which has certainly improved the sale of Southern Fried Chicken at this restaurant. I was fortunate enough to be a partner of Frank Bernard, one of the smartest businessmen that I ever ran into. And he and I started with the Georgian Towers Hotel.
He heard that I was going to convert that big high 22-story building into a hotel. He said, you're going to have a restaurant. And I said, yeah. He said, you're not a restaurant man, are you? And I said, no. How would you like to join me? That's how we started off in business together. We also bought the Park Royal Hotel together. We were partners in that, too, for the first 4 or 5 years, I guess. In front of his restaurant, he had the James Bond car.
The James Bond car? Yeah, I'd almost forgotten about that. The Aston Martin.
Well, they certainly were a great attraction for a lot of people. Just the fact that he was showing them around. Frank was a member of the city council for a few years.
I can recall when he first ran and was first elected, this was Frank Baker, the wild playboy, rah, rah, rah type of guy. But it turned out, he was, a darn good alderman.
I do remember once when I spoke to him and I asked him, Frank, are you enjoying it up at City Hall in what you're doing? And he said to me, Jack, he says, nobody smiles up there. Nobody laughs. And so that sort of thing wasn't his bag.
I was running for mayor of Vancouver, and Frank was my campaign manager. So Frank had arranged to get these red double-decker buses. There were 4 of them. And I don't know how Frank arranged it. I don't have a picture of it anymore. If I had it, I'd show it to you. But there is a picture someplace of the red double-decker English tour bus with this Ingram for Mayor sign, one end of the bus to the other, between the 2 sets of windows. And out of every window is a bare-ass Mariloma rugby player. Frank Baker, he set it up.
We had a suit, the period uniform. If we wanted Captain Vancouver to make an appearance at some civic promotion or what have you, Frank would dress up in the suit with the white socks and the breeches and so on.
They selected members from the Tourist Bureau and the Board of Trade to go to Japan in 1964, the year that Japan lifted the restrictions on the export of currency. So the whole world heard the Japanese could travel. The whole world was planning how to get that tourist business, and we all wondered, now how are we going to beat the others to capture this tourist business? And on the plane, as we're traveling over, we pulled out a suit of Captain Vancouver. We addressed Frank Baker as Captain Vancouver, and he had a big sword by the side. Well, as we landed in Japan, we had to go through customs and immigration, and they saw Frank Baker with a sword. That's forbidden in Japan. The police grabbed him and took him out and put him in jail. That was bad enough, although we knew we'd get him out. We got the Canadian consul. But the most wonderful thing happened. This was a headline, front page picture in the paper the next day. We had more publicity than anybody ever got.
He had this houseboat when they first came into popular use. He had this thing absolutely covered the top deck with artificial flowers and plants, and actually the boat became known as the flower pot.
He had a set of horns on the front, and he would play from the console in a cabin. He could play the first bars of O Canada on these horns. They would sound all over.
For those with a passion for boisterous dining, the place to go used to be Frank Baker's restaurant in West Vancouver. But hard times closed the restaurant and put Baker on the skids.
For the last few years, it's been all show and no dough. Frank Baker's flat busted.
We went to the very, very bottom. We lost everything. How are your cars, Frank? We lost it. How's the boat, Frank? We lost it. How's the business, Frank? We lost it. How's your apartment, Frank? We lost it. How's everything, Frank? We lost it.
He thought the money would just keep pouring in anyhow. The business ran down, 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 till finally he went broke.
I had an accountant who told me that go ahead and spend it as fast as you can, Frank. You're making it faster and it'll go on forever. And that was the worst advice I ever received. So with a combination of spending too much, not watching the business, and drinking too much, we ended up bankrupt.
It was a very difficult time for both of us. And I do feel in that time was a humbling time. It was maybe very good for us because we did stay together. That was probably the real tie that bound us together.
The attic in West Van had gone, had closed, and he set up a restaurant, Frank Baker's, at the corner of 13th and Canby. And he and Dorothy ran that and worked very hard at it. And I think it was about that time that his health started to go downhill.
I must say that in my long lifetime, he was the most colorful character I ever came into contact with.
Thank you very, very much for being here tonight, folks. And don't forget to come back. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Got one other question,
Certainly.
a little off the wall.
Go ahead.
Is that your real hair, Frank?
Pull it. Pull it. Pull it. Pull it hard.
It seems to be.
That's my real hair.
It's nice to see somebody else with bags under their eyes. I hope he has more fun getting his than I did mine.